and welcome to Policing TV. And I'm delighted to have with me today Lydia Davenport. Good morning, Lydia.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Lydia's got kind of over 20 years service with North Yorkshire Police, currently a Chief Inspector. But as well as policing the communities of North Yorkshire, Lydia has worked extensively overseas for a number of years supporting the British Overseas Territories, for the UK Home Office on the International Capabilities Team, as a lecturer for policing and security in the UAE, and now currently the technical program manager for Childlight, the Global Child Safety Institute. So you certainly have had a varied career to date. Lydia's built up an extensive experience in child safeguarding, which has led to her working overseas, leaving a legacy around child protection arrangements and building capability. So you have a really interesting story to tell. This first segment, really just to concentrate on your career in policing in the UK. And I'll leave you to talk around that. But specifically, what I'm interested in is what drew you into policing, because I think there's often a story there. And then during your career with North Yorkshire to date, what led you into the interest in child protection? So again, welcome and thank you. So I'll over to you to talk around the beautiful North Yorkshire and the policing of it.
Absolutely, yeah. As you've described, they're probably not the most standard of police careers, but certainly one I've enjoyed. And you're right, North Yorkshire is a beautiful place both to live and it's a great place to work. For those that don't sort of know the North Yorkshire Force, it's quite a rural force, very very big geographical area, but very small in terms of officer numbers. And I'll sort of explain why that becomes important, really, but. So yeah, you're right. 20 years now. 20 years ago, I joined North Yorkshire Police. I initially applied when I was 18 and a half, literally, as soon as that clock ticked over to 18 and a half. It was a job I'd wanted to do for a long time. It's that again, that sort of cliche around when I was little, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a detective. Detective was all I wanted to do. And then sort of went off to school. I was due to go to university, but ended up taking a sort of gap year, and then never actually went. And again, sort of got into working and career and chose that sort of path. But at 18 and a half, applied for North Yorkshire Police, and they very rightly told me to go away and get some life experience. That cliche of life experience. And if I'm being honest, it was the best thing they did for me, because at 18 and a half, personally, I wasn't ready to join the police. So I did just that, and I spent 3 years getting my life experience, ended up working for a pub company and working as a licensee. And I did have a brief foray into thinking that maybe the food and beverage trade was where I was going to see myself. In fact, bizarrely, just the other day, I found an email that I'd written from, must be in 2001, I think it is. So it's a very old email where I am turning down the position of a junior waitress at Claridge's Hotel in London, because I wanted to continue to pursue my career in policing, or try to at the time. So yeah, where life would have led if I'd joined Claridge's as a junior waitress 20 odd years ago. But I didn't, and I made the decision to join North Yorkshire. So in 2004, reapplied, and by then I think I had sort of grown up a bit and felt much more ready to join the police. And I loved it. Joined in 2004 and did the 2 years, and I look back on that really, really fondly. And there's sometimes days when I think, can I just go back to that? Just go back to being on the streets and dealing with everything. And that's, going back to North Yorkshire, because we were such a small force. We didn't have specialist departments for robberies, for vehicle crime, for drugs, for all those, for sexual offences. We we were it, essentially. So you had your response and you had your CID, and you dealt with everything. And for a very long time, I was the only female on my shift. So you found you did pick up a lot of either sexual crimes or anything to do with children. And that's where I first, sort of realised that these were the sorts of crimes I enjoyed investigating and the cases I enjoyed dealing with. However, and not many, to be honest, people who are detectives look upon this bit of my career in disgust, and they shouldn't, because it was a very interesting time. But after I finished my probation, I actually went into traffic for just short of 2 years. It was around 20 months, I think I was in traffic for. And essentially, I very naively wanted the fast car so I could get to the jobs quicker, because I was so proactive and so keen. I just wanted to be the first there, and I wanted to be dealing with everything. However, what I tended to find when I was on traffic is I enjoyed dealing with the road accidents and the crimes more than I enjoyed giving out tickets. I wasn't very good at the tickets, I'll be honest. And I remember I'd been in sort of well over a year at one point, and we'd had a job come in where it was a caravan was being stolen. It was a crime in progress. So blatted out, ended up arresting the 3 guys that were trying to steal this caravan. Brought them back to custody, and I was buzzing. And you've had a really good job, and you've done some good work. And I remember I was in the office writing up statements and the like, and my supervisor at the time called me, and he said, "What have you been up to today then?" And I was, I've locked up these 3 guys. It was a really good job. And how many tickets have you done today? None. I haven't done any tickets. Okay, right. Well, we really need to work on that, Lydia. Your quota's down for the month, so you really need to be focusing on your tickets. And it was after that conversation where I thought, traffic's not for me. I loved certain elements of it, but I enjoyed dealing with crime more. And a short while after that, I was leading on a fatal road accident. It was a hit and run fatal, a really nasty one, actually. And I ended up working jointly with CID on that case while we tried to track the offender, and subsequently ended up charging with a manslaughter case. And after sort of leading on the investigating for that case, I thought, no, this is definitely where I want to be. I want to be investigating crime. So from there, I sort of moved into CID, and again loved my time in CID. And like I was saying before, because we are very small, we dealt with anything and everything. So I became an ABE interviewer, and really enjoyed the interviewing side and dealing with either sexual cases or child-related cases. And it's not for everyone. And I always say this when people go into those types of departments, or when we're talking about them, you should never ever force someone to work in a department like that, working with children or working with sexual cases, because it isn't for everybody. So I enjoyed my time in CID. And then a couple of years after joining CID, an opportunity came up to work on the ROCUs, the Regional Organised Crime Unit, and it was a brand new unit at the time, because it was obviously going through all the changes from SOCA to NCA. I thought, I think I could do that. So despite being a good DC, I'd never done surveillance, so it was a bit of an eye opener for me. And I'd probably say of all the jobs I've done in policing, I found surveillance the most challenging in terms of I wasn't a natural fit, I don't think. But that said, I still really, really enjoyed it, and we dealt with some good cases. And because we were quite a new unit, we were looking at what kind of remit of crimes we were going to be picking up, and we didn't just want to be picking up the drugs jobs and the ones that they expect of ROCUs. So we ended up dealing with a case where it was a peer-to-peer sharing case, and we got some intelligence to say a guy in West Yorkshire was sharing indecent images. We went and did the warrant, and that ended up being one of the sort of biggest jobs of its time. He had over 250,000 images on his device, which was one of the biggest hauls at the time. But what was interesting and I guess sad about that case was we identified contact offending with very, very young ages. And it was a truly sort of awful case, and the amount of lives it destroyed as a result of our intervention. But of course, the amount, hopefully, of children we safeguarded as well. That was a real sort of pivot case for me in terms of this is where I want to be. This is what I want to deal with these types of cases. And so from the ROCU, again, did a couple of years on there, and then went for my sergeants. So that will have been sort of, what was I, about eight years in by that point. Went for my sergeants, and at the same time, I actually put in for the HPDS, the High Potential Development Scheme, and actually was very lucky. I had a good year, and was successful on both of those. So they sort of ran in parallel. Passed my sergeant's board, and then very shortly after found I was successful on the HPDS, which was a good shock, but something that would change my career slightly, as HPDS can do. And so from my promotion position was into intelligence. So I came back to force at that point. So having been on the regional team, came back to force and intelligence. So whilst I was doing the intelligence role, there was also the HPDS requirements. So as it was at that time, obviously it's not in existence now, but you work through a postgraduate diploma, and then you work towards a master's in leadership and management. So in terms of the HPDS, it's always a bit of I don't know, it's a bit of a sore topic in some ways. It has a real stigma attached to it, I think, that some people don't like the HPDS, some people are big fans of it, but I found that once I was on it, you sort of had this thing over your head, like, oh, one of them, she's one of them. And it in some ways it was like, yeah, fine, I'm one of them, but I will prove to you that I deserve to be in this position. And I just then found you almost were working doubly hard to prove yourself, and I didn't need to do that because I was good at my job. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself, but because of this sort of stigma that comes with the HPDS, you just do you want to prove that you are worthy of that position. And like I say, it comes with its opportunities. So I ended up with a master's from Warwick University from being on the HPDS, which is something I never would have got without that opportunity. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. And then there's what's meant to happen with the HPDS is around the promotions. So the problem we had in North Yorkshire, and I think across other forces as well, is there was no set structure for what being on the HPDS meant for you. So it didn't mean, oh, in 2 years you'll be an inspector, and then in another 2 years you'll be a chief inspector. There was nothing like that. It was just, if you are deemed to be competent in your current role, then there should be a way to promote you. But every force was doing it differently. There was no set standards. So, you'd return to your HPDS colleagues a couple of years later. Some had been doubly promoted, some were still at the same position, and it all just got a little bit messy. And I have to say, not to be critical of North Yorkshire, but they put too many people on the HPDS. For a very small force, we had at one time, I think 5 or 6 of us at different stages on the HPDS, and then they can't then support the promotions because it's not fair on others that are also going through promotion routes. So it didn't work in that respect, but I don't look back on it with any sort of regrets because of the opportunities it gave me as well. So HPDS aside, I'm a DS in intelligence, and again enjoyed that. It was a different area of policing. I hadn't done intelligence before, so again opened up a lot of learning. And then from there, I went into the staff office. So that was one thing. If you're on HPDS, you go into the staff office. And again, don't look back on that with any regrets. I loved being in the staff office, partly because of the DEP who I was working to was excellent. He was a very sort of people-focused person. And at the same time I was studying for my master's in leadership, I was working to what I consider to be a very good leader. So I probably learnt more from him around leadership than maybe I did from the masters. But it was a really good time in the staff office. And I also had the opportunity to work as a peer inspector with the HMIC. So working again on child protection inspections. So went into different forces to inspect them and support the inspections around child protection. That was a great job because you really got to see the processes and structures and understand how forces did things well, or how things weren't working so well, and you could really learn from some of that sort of information gathering. So I loved the peer inspector role, but it was always just a temporary sort of in and out to support force inspections. From there, then I ended up back in intelligence, so ran our Force Intelligence Bureau. But at the time, my force thought that one job wasn't enough, so we'll give a head of MAPA as well. So I had 50% head of the Force Intelligence Bureau and 50% head of MAPA, the Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements. Without doubt, the policing role that gave me the most sleepless nights was MAPA. Managing, and we had a very high number of sex offenders in North Yorkshire, and a number of what were deemed very high risk. And it is, when you know that an offender's coming out to your area and you've been told that it's just a matter of time before they offend against a child. It's, you're just waiting for it to happen. You don't sleep when someone tells you that, and that person's coming out to your area. So again, a very steep learning curve around what we could do to try and prevent that offending, to try and protect children. It was a very interesting role, and you learn a lot about partnership working as well, and the importance of sort of working together to try and manage these offenders in very, very sort of high risk situations. So again, sort of moving through the time. So then got a temporary chief inspector position, and at that time our head of intelligence was a chief inspector role. So I was head of intelligence for North Yorkshire in that chief inspector role. Again, a sort of challenging role. There'd been a lot of anyone that sort of knows the intelligence department, they tend to be the ones that get a lot of moves, a lot of changes, a lot of staff cuts. Sometimes they're centralised and they're sent back out to area, then they're centralised again, and it's one of the departments that I feel saw the most amount of disruption, if you like, and change. So going in to manage that was challenging, but again, really, really enjoyed it. I had a fantastic team, both within headquarters and then across the county as well, because we sort of looked after all the resources. And during that time, I was asked by our senior leadership team to run a force child sex exploitation review. So it was a huge sort of force-wide review that ran for a few months. Not a popular role, because obviously in essence you're doing an inspection. And again, it was how to manage those relationships so that sort of encouraging people that it's a learning thing. This is not about disciplining people or trying to find fault. It's about looking where we've made mistakes or where we've got gaps, and then trying to make sure that those gaps are filled, and we kind of learn from that information. So it ended up being huge reports, lots of recommendations, but I felt was very, very beneficial to move North Yorkshire into a better place in terms of child sexual exploitation. So that's sort of, I guess in a nutshell, my period in North Yorkshire. I've whistle-stopped through it, but I think sort of I look most fondly at my time sort of within CID, dealing with some of those more in-depth crimes. There was one job I remember which very nearly caused me to leave, and I think it was around 2009. It will have been when I was in CID. And it was a rape case. It was a serious sexual assault. It was a very young female involved, a child, and investigated it. And it was one of those ones where you can't quite believe it, because I had a witness. You never get a witness. I had forensic evidence that pointed to the offence. You very rarely get that as well, especially that's so conclusive. And I had an offender saying couldn't remember. So by the time we got to court and it went to trial, because they pleaded not guilty, even the barrister was probably the most confident I've ever seen a barrister in terms of a case going through. And I remember at the time the jury went out, they were out for 10 minutes, if that, for deliberations. And everyone was, I think, of the same view that, well, I mean, this is easy, really. It's the evidence is there. It's a fairly sort of cut and dry case. Not guilty. Not guilty. And I remember being sat in that courtroom, and thankfully the victim was at home. She'd gone through the special measures in terms of appearing at court. And I just remember being sat there and hearing the words "not guilty," and just thinking, right, hold it together, hold it together, hold it together, because I'm surrounded by sort of the defendant's family. Left the court, went into the back room, and I burst into tears. Just what on earth has happened? And you can't ask anyone. You can't go to the jury. What were you thinking? This is awful. And just thinking, how am I going to tell her? How do you break that news when everything's been so positive in terms of a conviction and her getting the outcome that she deserves? And I just remember thinking, I can't do this. Can't do this. I can't let people down like this. I can't work with a system that's so broken. And I did have a day where I thought, right, I need to find something else, because this is not the right job for me. But thankfully it was just a day, and I sort of reflected on it, and actually if we all gave up, with a bad court case or a bad result, then you'd lose all your good people in policing. So it made me probably more determined, that actually we need to get, we need to do good investigations. We need to make sure that everything that we do supports our victims of crime. And there was nothing wrong with that case. There was no sort of I to this day I will never know what was in the minds of those jury members. But I know that it was nothing the victim did wrong. It was nothing the police did wrong. It was just one of those unfortunate decisions. But it makes you more determined to sort of push on for victims and get good outcomes for them. But I'll never forget that case. That sort of stays with you, I think.
Lydia, I've got a couple of real things I want to dive into, but I just want to go talk about the case you're just talking about, because your experience in child protection, and it hasn't stopped yet in your story, because we're going to venture into what you've done overseas. There's been huge changes, and I kind of got two questions. The first one's around welfare and whether you think I found your story then interesting, because I'm sure there's lots of horrific experiences you've had to investigate and support people through. So that's one level of potential trauma and impact on police officers. Obviously, losing a case like that has stayed with you, probably a different type of, and the positive impact it had on you has probably benefited people in the future. But do you think forces are, I know things have improved, it's not an area I've worked in, but do you think forces are doing enough to support investigators as they look at, what you've not talked about today, and quite rightly you wouldn't, but people have got to understand, you will see images, you will see photographs and hear accounts, which, my view, is some of the most harrowing you could hear and have to deal with. So do you think forces are doing enough to support people working in child protection?
Yeah, and I think you're right in what you say. I think they've got better. I think back to when I was, when I talk about that case from the ROCU, one of the hardest conversations, and this is ahead of fatal messages, and one of the hardest conversations I've had to have is to go to a mother and tell her that I have found evidence that her child has been abused by somebody she knows. That you can't sort of prepare yourself for that, because imagine hearing that as a parent, as any sort of member of the public, to hear that it's devastating. And I think back to that time, and there was very little in place for us then. I think, I'm not saying I I don't say I've not been traumatized by it, because I think it impacts people in different ways. And I think if you aren't impacted by it, then you're not human. You're not, you can't be a robot. But to answer your question, I guess I think more is in place now. I think it could still be better. I think sometimes that support is a little bit superficial, and it's seen as a tick box rather than genuine support for people. I know when I was with CEOP, which I'll sort of come on to, they put in mandatory psychological assessments for people working in that area, and at certain fixed periods of time, depending on which department you were working with, which I think was quite important. But again, it's avoiding that just being then a tick box exercise where it's like, oh yeah, I've done that hour with the psychologist, I'm all good. It has to be meaningful. It has to be support that actually is digging down into the person and whether they are in the right place. And you've got all the challenges that go with that. Certainly in North Yorkshire, and I'm sure it's the case in other forces at the moment, they can't get detectives. They can't get people to fill those detective roles, because I think a lot of it is because of the nature of the work and the demand and the lack of resources. So when you've got somebody saying, I'd quite like to come out of child protection now because it's really impacted me. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, your decision is noted, but we can't let you go because there's nobody to fill your space. And that could be the case for several months. And what damage are we doing to that person in that time? So it's really difficult, I think. And it's an unenviable position to be in terms of SLTs now in policing, because you are managing sort of your massive resourcing issues against some very serious welfare issues. And we know all the research that's been done around PTSD and police officers being traumatized, but it's balancing that support with what they need to run a police force, and they need to have people turning out every day to very, very difficult, challenging jobs. It's a tricky one.
It's a real challenging one, particularly now with the public scrutiny into policing day to day. I think that welfare needs is probably going to spread into other areas of policing as well.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on the HPDS, because it seems to have been overall a positive experience for you, and I think you've, the benefits. And latterly, the forces, UK policing has looked at direct entry to bring fresh talent in. Do you have a view on HBDS and the concept of it, or how do you think, having been on that journey, and I would imagine, from what I know about you, there's certainly been some development. You certainly embraced the opportunity. I entirely get the feeling I've got to do better than everyone else now, but or work harder, because I saw that myself in my career with people who are on it. But is there a need? And if there's a need, what's the answer for taking talent from that early potential into leadership roles?
Oh, it's a difficult one. I think they're still asking this question in the college, aren't they? I'm trying to work out what is the best route, because obviously they looked at the direct entry route where they brought people in at superintendent level, and I think some really worked, but some really didn't work. Like absolutely categorically failed. So, but that's not an argument maybe to get rid of it completely just because you have a handful of failures, but it obviously showed that somewhere that system of recruiting them was flawed. So I think there has to be a way to attract that sort of talent, and I think we need to sort of embrace some of that those external skills and experiences. I genuinely think there's places in policing for people with better business acumen, with different backgrounds, that don't necessarily have to be frontline officers and running a PSU serial, but they might have some. And I know this has been looked at, but they might have some some much more effective skills. Whether they need to be warranted officers, I don't know. But I don't think we bring in external talent enough, and look at really where it could benefit policing in a more positive way. I think we put very good police officers into senior leadership roles, where they're suddenly managing thousands of people and managing big budgets, and expect them to do it really well because they've been a really good cop. And it doesn't work. So why aren't we bringing in other people to sort of better support that and leave that really good cop to be a really good cop? Albeit at a senior rank level, but doing the things that they're good at, rather than the things they're trying to be good at. But I know this is something that's been looked at all over, and I think we're getting better. I do, but we've still got a long way to go. And like you just touched on before, the added public scrutiny and the media's role in, I would say, in destroying policing at the moment is not helping. And I think it's placing senior leadership teams in a really, really difficult position.
I think we've got a whole another interview about that, I think. And, well, because it is such an interesting concept, and even just seeing the response to the result from the court yesterday with the murder charge against the police officer, you can see the level of scrutiny that everything is under now. So getting our senior leaders well prepared and getting the right people is important. Look, Lydia, I've listened with fascination because I know you reasonably well, but there's things I found out today as well. So you've had an amazing career. I could talk to you longer about it, but we'll draw this session to a close, if I may, and then I'm looking forward to talking to you again around how you've taken the extraordinary experience you've got as a police officer in the UK into the overseas arena, and you've done some amazing things. So, but for now, thanks, Lydia, and we'll talk again into part 2 and talk about your experience overseas.